Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cinema Mancuso, and this is Notes on the News. I'm Peter Mancuso, and this is the show where I break down the biggest stories in film, media, entertainment, and give you my thoughts. If you join us live, super happy to have you. If at any point during the show you have any questions or comments about any of the topics I'm going to be covering, feel free to drop them in the live chat. I have it pulled up here. Do my best to kind of keep an eye on it. It's always more interesting for me when we're able to kind of get a conversation started. So, again, if you have any thoughts like that, feel free to drop them there. If you haven't already, please like this live stream. It really helps with engagement and the algorithm and people, find the channel. So if you haven't found the channel, why not subscribe? Trying to grow this community as best as I can. If you watch this after the fact, still super happy to have you. By the time you're watching this, there should be time codes down in the description so you can, jump around at your perusal, your pleasure, right? We stream the show every Tuesday, 6 p.m. Eastern. And same deal as before. If you haven't already, please like this video and do not forget to subscribe. Okay, let's take a look at the box office from this past week. Total domestic box office was a little over $206 million, about an 8% jump from the prior weekend. Really interesting stuff happening here. And normally I start with the new releases, but I actually like to start with Sinners, right? So this movie came out last week. It's now in its second week, holding on to its first place spot. Rave reviews, great reception from both critics and audiences. And it actually saw a bump. And at first I was like, wait, was there technically like a long weekend for Easter? Because they opened Easter weekend. I don't think so. This movie, on word of mouth, had a 57% jump to now bring in, for this past week, a little over $75 million. That's phenomenal. For an original movie, a primarily black-led original movie, that's insane. And that's so awesome. I'm hoping to go see this at some point. I really want to go see it in IMAX. But as anyone knows, the IMAX at Lincoln Square in New York, in Manhattan, is the toughest ticket in town. Whereas in Providence, where I'm from, there is also a one of the few IMAX theaters in the world that's like the vertical IMAX with the 70mm projection capabilities. For some reason, one of those in the entire world, there's only like a couple, like maybe a dozen or a couple dozen in the world. One of them happens to be in Providence, Rhode Island. Went on Fandango, it's like there's like every seat's available, right? So I'm just like, I wish I could just go in Providence, but I'm stuck here on this island. But anyway, so this is doing really well. And domestically, it's up to 123-ish million. Worldwide, a little bit more, 163. So again, most of this is domestic, off of a $90 million budget. So the thing before was, worldwide, it was only at around 60 last time. So what we talked about was, it's really great for an original movie, but it's, still below the budget. And it's all a numbers game, right? But now in week 2, it's already crossed that 90 million threshold, and it's very close to crossing that doubling the budget, which is what you want, because the budget doesn't usually account for things like marketing and advertising and theater split and everything. So for the studio to break even, you ideally want to double the budget roughly, right? So yeah, it's at around 80%, 81% return. This thing, people are already saying it's like the first Oscar movie of the year. Again, just heard phenomenal things about it. So I'm really hoping I can catch it in a quality experience. Though I'm sure, a good movie is a good movie. So I'm sure I would love it even if I'm just watching it, at like a Regal. Rinky-dink Regal. A rinky-dink Regal. But let's look at like the new stuff. Though maybe that's misleading, because the number one new release, quote unquote, is Star Wars Episode 3: Revenge of the Sith. Wait a minute. Didn't this come out 20 years ago? Well, it is being re-released for its 20th anniversary. I remember when it was in its 0th anniversary, right? When it came out, I was 8 years old and to go see it. Revenge of the Sith is the movie that made me want to make movies. Star Wars as a whole, but really Revenge of the Sith. This tomato meter and popcorn meter is just reflective of the movie at large. So I was surprised to see the popcorn meter so low. I thought audiences in general really loved it, but so maybe the popcorn meter is skewed more towards older moviegoers. Older meaning like more Gen X. Because my generation loves this movie. Even though I consciously know a lot of it is garbage. there's just so much about it that really works for me. And then there's also the nostalgia factor, and also just, you can really see an ambition being painted on the screen, even if it's not always, how do I put this? Best capitalized on, right? This brought in a little under $25.5 million, which exceeded the projections that were going on for it, around 13 to 20. I'd put the target around 17. So the fact that this exceeded those projections, again, for a 20-year-old re-release for a movie that, you know, everyone who wants to see it owns it on DVD or Blu-ray or 4K. It's on Disney Plus, right? So the fact that, you know, it's so easy to watch this movie, and people still turned out to go see it. Me and my fiance Viviana, I was like, you know, I'm really excited to see it in theaters, because I haven't seen it in theaters since it came out 20 years ago, right? So I was really excited to see it on the big screen. But I was like, let's shake things up. So we went to go see the 4DX version. And if you don't know what 4DX is, it's kind of a misnomer, because it's typically, when you hear 4D in terms of entertainment, you think 3D plus something, right? So 3D plus smells or sound or effects or some other thing, right? 4DX has the latter stuff, but not the former. No 3D. At least the 4DX theater I went to go to. But it's almost like Disney World, where your seats, it's programmed. There's like less seats in the theater, because they need all this room for this extra machinery, and the seats kind of bounce around. Definitely an interesting experience. I've never gone. I've known about it, but I've never gone to see a 4DX movie. But I figured, you know what? For my favorite movie of all time, let's do this in this different way. And parts of it were really cool in 4DX, but on the whole, at least the way this 4DX screen was programmed, it was just really, it got old really quickly. Like it was best, like less was more. Most of the time it was just kind of like jerking me around. It had almost little to nothing to do with what was on screen. Obviously, like, it was jostling when something jostling was happening, like they're in a space battle or something. But it didn't feel like a roller coaster where it's like, if the thing goes like this, you move like this. But anyway, so again, people really turned out for this. I don't know if it's continuing into this next weekend. Though, if it's possible, Disney might decide, like, let's keep it in theaters a little bit longer, right? And again, this is all just, like, extra, you know, icing on the cake for this film, which is already, you know, over its 20 years has made almost $900 million at the box office. So this is by no means really crucial to the box office story of this film, but it definitely speaks to our moment in current moviegoing, that people will turn out to go to the movies if you give them an experience worth the theatrical experience, right? Also opening this week at number 4, we have The Accountant 2. This is the sequel to The Accountant 1, also just known as The Accountant, no number. This is a series now. I guess technically it's a series. Now there's a second one about, I think it's like an autistic accountant who also, you know, fights crime. I've never really understood what it's really. It's like an action thriller. It's the Wikipedia says it's a follows an autistic certified public accountant who makes his living sanitizing fraudulent financial accounting records of criminal and terrorist organizations around the world that are experiencing internal embezzlement. Interesting. So now they've made a sequel, which critics actually thought was fine. Audiences seemed to like quite a bit. It made about $24.5 million, which fell within the projections, but on the lower end of things, it was projected to make around 18 to 35, and I put the target around 27. So kind of fell a little bit below what we were expecting. Worldwide, it's made almost $40 million, but again, it was made for like $80 million. So now, unlike Sinners, which had a similar kind of situation, actually Sinners was in a better situation because it, I think, had made about 2/3 of the budget. It was at 60, but it was made for 90, whereas this is more like half of the budget. Unlike Sinners, I don't think this is going to have incredible word of mouth, and people are like, this is such an amazing theatrical experience. So it remains to be seen, you know, how it's going to do in the next couple of weeks. Also opening, we have at number 6, Until Dawn. This is a cinematic adaptation of a PlayStation. Was it only PlayStation? I just know it was on PlayStation, but I don't know if it was an exclusive now that I'm saying it. Based off of a video game. And I talked about this last week, but it just seems so weird that they're making this movie. And it's not weird in the sense that business-wise it makes sense because it's a brand. And it's capitalizing on the brand. But video games in general, but particularly something like Until Dawn. Until Dawn is within the genre of interactive movie, right, is what I would call it, right? Interactive drama is what Wikipedia calls it, where essentially it's almost like you're watching a movie, but then there'll be like little moments where you can make a decision or interact, and it'll impact what happens in the story. Like, sure, it's basically riffing on, like classic 80s horror movies. I guess the premise is you have to survive until dawn. But again, there's so much variability in the story based off of your decisions in your playthrough. So that it encourages repeat playthroughs. So when you make a movie, you're just locking it in. So a game that is commenting or satirizing a trite film genre and brings novelty to it through the fact it's in the interactive medium, when you then adapt it into film, it's just a tired genre, right? There's nothing about what made Until Dawn interesting, which I haven't played it, admittedly, but from my understanding, you lose it by solidifying the storyline. And it seems like I was correct in feeling like that was going to hurt it. Because critics did not like this movie and audiences were fine on it, but as I've talked about, people, when reviewing movies or something like on Popcorn Meter, or if they get asked when they're coming out of the movie what they thought of it, they're always going to be way more complimentary to it, because either consciously or more likely even subconsciously, people don't want to believe that they just wasted $20 in 2 hours of their time, right? So they're always going to be way more generous and way more forgiving, at least on those initial responses. So the fact that the Popcorn Meter is at 69%, that means it's dog shit, right, for audiences, right? Because again, they're going to be way more forgiving of a lot of stuff. In terms of the actual money brought in, it made just a smidge over $8 million, which was actually my exact target. So at least it met that kind of benchmark. And it's on its way to profitability. It only cost $50 million, so that's one of the benefits of making a generic horror film. Is that there's a reason why so many are made. It's because they're cheap, right? That's why they're so frequent and it's so lucrative, because the ceiling is low, but so is the floor, right? You're not going to make $300 million with a horror movie, but you're not going to necessarily make $1 million. Like, there's almost like a baked-in amount of money that you can expect to make. So it's made about a little over 18 million worldwide. So I don't know how it's going to hold, especially since the reception has been so bad, but if it can kind of hold, it could get up to 30 million. That's not preposterous, but I wouldn't say it's likely, but I wouldn't say it's unlikely either. Also opening this week, a re-release of, let's see, a lot of re-releases, and I'll talk about some more in a second. Re-release of a Pink Floyd concert film, Pink Floyd Live at Pompeii. Apparently this was from the 70s, and doing some quick research, I don't know if this was ever even released in the United States in theaters. So this is actually, I think it's first, and that's why you see, even though it's a re-release, its total domestic is the same as this past weekend's box office, right? And so, very small, but again, this trend of re-releases, we also have Pride and Prejudice. So this was a weird situation in terms of what frame we're in, because this re-release of the 2005 Keira Knightley Pride and Prejudice opened on Easter Sunday, of all days, right? So it's open last weekend, technically, but it was only for the one day of that weekend. So I'm classifying this as the second week. Second frame, if you will. But again, this is a very beloved film. It's actually admittedly one of those films I've never seen, but I've heard really great things about, and it's kind of one of those white whales of mine that I want to try to watch. So again, like with Revenge of the Sith, it's the amount of money made, which was much less than Revenge of the Sith here, right? We're only talking less than $3 million for the week. But the fact that this is making into the top 10 and Revenge of the Sith, These films that are very easily accessible to moviegoers. The fact that they turned out to the movie theater to go see these movies, I think speaks to something. I mean, we've always seen this, but I think one of the things that was lost with the advent of home media was because pre-home media, films would be in theaters for way longer. Like, we're talking like a year in primary theaters, and then they would go to what were called second-run theaters. So you might have a movie, the idea of like, oh, well, you couldn't just watch any movie at any time. That was true, but there was a chance that certain movies, especially if they were really popular, might be in a movie theater for like years, right? And movies would be then re-released, like, Disney, that was Disney's big claim to fame, like taking it out of the Disney vault every 7 years and putting it back in theaters, right? But with the advent of home media with VHS and then DVD, and right, I think the business model shifted to where, oh, well, we don't need to do that because people can just get it at home. And audiences may have been like, oh, I don't need to go to the theater. I could just get a VHS and just watch it whenever I want at home. But I think what we're starting to see now, and this isn't the beginning of it, but this is just a really visible sign of this, is that there is a market for older movies played in theaters. And that's kind of like, that, not solely, but that's been a big part of the Fathom Events business model, right? Like just these older classics, right? Because there's something about the theatrical experience that's just so different. I'm not one of those people who's like a purist where it's like, oh my God, I can't watch anything at home, right? That's not me, right? If a movie's good, a movie's good. But that said, seeing it in theaters adds a different dimensionality to it, right? It's not that it's adding to the quality, but rather enhancing the quality or deepening the quality, right? So, hopefully the success of these, you'll see a lot more re-releases. Not in a self-referential, nostalgic, cynical way, but as part of our theatrical diet. So you have, I saw someone tweet this, that, looking at this top 10, we have, looking at the top 5, right? Let's just look at the top 5. We have an original movie, a adaptation of a video game, a re-release, a sequel, and an animated film based off of the Gospels, the Christianity, right? That's really cool to see. It's very diverse, right? And I think that's the issue, is that it's not that we don't want or need sequels or re-release or spin-offs or what have you. It's that when they become like they talk about like when you're getting dinner, like you want your plate to be diverse. You have all the different food groups, lots of different colors. It's more nutritious that way. This box office I'm looking at is looking very nutritious, right? So I think that is hopefully where the industry is starting to go, where you have more frequent re-releases, and maybe that will then in turn encourage more repertory theaters, which are a dying breed, right? So having theaters specifically dedicated to older movies, or at least making that a core part of their business, like places like Alamo Drafthouse or in New York Nighthawk Cinema, right? So it would really be cool to see that, but this is a really exciting top 10 this week, and I'm really happy to see Sinners, especially, again, this original film, not only top the box office charts, but again have a 57% jump in its second week, which is almost unheard of. Especially for a film that opened wide. It's not like it was a limited release or something, right? And then looking ahead, speaking of spin-offs and stuff, we have Thunderbolts asterisk. I don't know what the asterisk is for. This is the next MCU movie. The reviews actually just started coming out today. It seems like people like it well enough, which for the MCU is like, it may as well be Citizen Kane at that point. This is going to be a pretty big opening, at least that we've seen for 2025 so far. And one more thing, JJ Because, aka Jacob Bob, a friend of Cinema and QSO, writes the comments, and Metrograph. That's another one in New York that I think exclusively is a repertory theater. They don't show new movies at all. Like, it's not, if they might show a newer movie, but it's not like they're showing the new releases the way a AMC or Regal is. But again, unfortunately, Jacob, Metrograph is like the exception that proves the rule, right? It'd be cool if there were more repertory theaters in places like Rhode Island, like I was talking about before, right? And then there is one, I think there's the Avon Cinema in Providence on, what is it, Thayer Street? This is really getting esoteric now, because me and Jacob are both from Rhode Island here. But, but it would be cool to see more of that, or at the very least have that kind of programming at multiplexes, right? Like, make that a core part of your business. But movie theaters, here's my segue. Movie theaters are too focused on movies like Thunderbolts, which again, has been getting pretty decent reviews, but, it's definitely the tentpole formula, right? It's projected to make around 67 to 85 million. I'm going to put my target right around 77. I'm always hoping movies are better than I think they're going to be. I never go into a movie going, I hope this is bad, right? Because again, I don't want to waste my time, right? So I'm hoping that this and then Fantastic Four really kind of bring new life for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Okay, before going on, I just want to give a quick plug to another YouTube channel I have. I recently started in the last couple of weeks, or maybe even a couple of months at this point. Replay Rewind, 1,000 video games across 50 years of gaming history. Can I play them all before I die? Well, we're going to find out. The goal is to play through all these games, most of them I've never played before, to kind of trace the history of gaming. And it's been a lot of fun already. Definitely go check that out. It really would mean the world to me. I'm trying to grow that channel. You can find the link to that in the description down below. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay. Let's talk about story number 1. Actually, hold on. I'm trying to fix something, sorry. All right, there we go. All right, let's talk about story number 1. So the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, their Board of Governors has finally being the operative word here, they've codified a new rule requiring voters for the Academy Awards, for the Oscars, to actually watch the nominated films. And you might be going, wait, that wasn't a rule? I knew that wasn't a rule, but I think a lot of people just assume that would be part of it, right? So a press release stated, quote, Academy members must now watch all nominated films in each category to be eligible to vote in the final round for the Oscars, end quote. So this is going to go into effect essentially immediately for the 98th Academy Awards, which is March of 2026. So the upcoming Oscars in about a year. It'll be a category by category basis, so it's not like you have to watch everything to vote at all. If you haven't seen all of the cinematography nominees, you can't vote, but if you've seen all the acting ones, you can vote, right? So it's it's category by category. Doesn't necessarily apply to the shortlist round of nominations where people are like throwing out potential nominees. And the way this is going to be verified essentially will be through the members only Academy Screening Room, TM, right? Like that's all Academy Screening Room. This is essentially, because, for a lot of awards ceremonies, or whether it's the Oscars or SAG, members of those organizations get what are called screeners. And back in the day, they were physical copies of the movie, whether it's a VHS or a DVD. Nowadays, it's usually a digital code, a digital file, or even more likely some kind of almost like internal closed network. That's probably the wrong technical word, but like a streaming service only you as a member of this organization have access to. And the movies are only up for that, the voting period, right? So it's not like you just have access. Whereas before you had the screeners, you basically just had the movie down. So the way this will work, theoretically, is that it'll be verified. If you watch it through there, then the Academy knows you have indeed watched this movie. Now, the Wrap does note that the Academy will also plan to implement a quote-unquote seen elsewhere component. If you see it at a festival or some other qualifying experience or venue, that will count, right? No mention of like, well, what if you just see it at like a Regal, or you catch it on streaming before the awards? No mention of that, right? But previously, so again, the big surprise, I think, for a lot of normal people seeing this headline is the surprise that this was not already a requirement. The Wrap notes that previously, the only exceptions to that would have been for Best Foreign Language Film, which is now titled the Best International Feature Film, as well as the Best Documentary Feature, right? You had to prove that you indeed saw all 5 films in each of those categories in theaters, right? At like an official screening for the film. But other than that, all the other categories, as long as you were eligible on other grounds, you could just vote and not have watched all the nominees. You may very well have not watched any of the nominees. It was really just the honor system. Now, to be fair, in a give or take, an average year sees about 40 feature films and 15 short films nominated every year, which is a lot, to be fair. Especially if you're like a working person, you're someone in the industry working, right? But voters also have access to the Academy screening room, right? Like, especially in 2025, it is made incredibly easy, to access these films. And me saying 40 films is a lot. Some of you might be scoffing, like, oh, 40 films. I watch 800 films a year, which maybe is true, but a lot of people don't do that. A lot of people, even if you're in the industry, you might not necessarily watch one movie a day, every day, right? And again, many voters, because every year before the Oscars, the trades like Deadline or Variety or Hollywood Reporter, they'll publish like anonymous interviews with Academy voters or get like little sound bites, and many of the voters admit with no sense of regret or remorse, they admit to not watching all the films, right? I see in the comments, Jacob wrote Dune 2 Justice, 100%. That was like one of the really annoying ones from this past Oscar season, with someone being like, oh, I didn't even bother with Dune Part 2. I couldn't even get through the first one, right? It's like, well, then you shouldn't be voting. Like, then you need to watch these movies to determine what are the best movies, right? And again, this has always been a problem, but it's even more of a concern now, and this is a statement from the Academy. It's more of a concern now because, quote, it's more of a concern, quote, in recent years since the organization massively expanded its membership and brought in a lot of younger members who are busier with their careers, end quote. So that's an interesting kind of way to frame it. That because the Academy has made a lot of efforts to diversify its membership. But when you diversify and your membership base is not primarily old white men who are retired or don't really work all that much anymore, that means that your membership is now a lot busier, right? So that makes sense. And, all in all, this really is a major change for the better. It seems really simple, but I think it's really going to, the same way the expanding the membership, I mean, if you look at the films that have won or even been nominated over the past decade and compare it to the decade prior, it really is like night and day. So many different kinds of films, different genres, different, marginalized communities represented both in front and behind the camera, right? I think you're going to see even more of that now with a change like this. Because ultimately, awards don't matter. And they really shouldn't matter to validate a film's quality. But if the mission is to reflect the best of the best, then we should, then if we're going to do that, if we're going to endeavor on that project, we really should create the framework and conditions so that it best reflects the best of the best, right? Because so many films in multiple categories over the years, this really started in like the 80s with the dawn of like the Oscar bait movie, then really solidified with like the Harvey Weinstein Oscar campaign kind of philosophy, right? So many films just win based off of word of mouth and not the quality. And this is known as coattail voting, where you just go, when you're voting, you just go, well, I didn't see this, but people said it was really good, or, oh, it was so powerful, or, oh, it would be really cool for that person to win. So then they just vote, right? And again, many people are surprised to learn that this wasn't always a rule. And the Hollywood Reporter notes that a rule like this has been standard practice for the BAFTAs, which is essentially the British version of the Academy. This has been standard practice for them for several years now. To be fair, this could still be abused. Like, you could just have someone pull up the movie and then just like leave it running and go do something else. But at that point, that's a lot of work to cheese the systems. You may as well just watch the movies at that point. And again, like I said, this really furthers the mission of breaking the Oscar mold, right? Of like what films are Oscar movies. And so I think with this, you're really going to see a lot more unconventional nominations, but more importantly, because this is really where this rule applies, you're going to see a lot more unconventional wins in certain categories. But the unconventionalness won't be because they're not good picks. In fact, they're going to be the movies that probably should have won, or the actors or the people that should have won, but just didn't because not enough people saw that movie. Okay, just want to give another quick plug to the podcast I do with my fiance Viviana called Now That's What I Call a Franchise, where we pick a film franchise and we go through every single installment, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We just wrapped up a couple weeks ago our season on Middle Earth, Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, all that good stuff. This Friday, we're actually starting up our newest season on The Muppets, which has already been so much fun. We've only just been watching old television specials that no one has ever heard of or seen. It's already been a lot of fun, so definitely go check that podcast out so you don't miss that, the start of our new season. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also just find us on YouTube if that's your preferred way to podcast. You can also just find us in the description down below. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay. Let's talk about story number 2. So Carlton Cuse? I apologize. Pardon me. Maybe I should have looked up how to say this guy's name. But nevertheless, Carlton Cuse has been announced that he's going to be showrunning a new Star Wars show for Disney Plus, along with his son Nick Cuse. This picture above me is not him with his son Nick Cuse. That's actually with Damon Lindelof. Literally, we know no other details about this project. The reason why I'm talking about it is because it marks a shift for Disney, and Disney Plus specifically, in terms of their strategy when making content for the streamer, particularly long form television, traditional episodic television series, right? IndieWire notes that the streamer has avoided traditional showrunners. Since I think they really wanted to strike a different chord and make their content offerings unique and distinct from what you could get on TV. But I think that was for the worse, right? Because this ethos or this guiding philosophy of avoiding traditional showrunners is probably the cause of why so many of their shows just feel like dragged out movies, and the pacing sucks, and it doesn't feel like each episode has a very clear, this is the arc of this episode and this is the arc of that episode. If you don't even know what I'm talking about, a showrunner is, because for a movie you have a writer, sometimes a group of writers, but usually just a writer. Whereas on TV, because there's so much stuff that needs to be written, you might have a writer's room with multiple writers contributing ideas, but then one person might go off and write episode 2, and then another person's writing episode 4. But it's much more collaborative. But the person who oversees that, they run the show, is the showrunner. And in a lot of ways, in the way that the director of a feature is kind of considered the author, the showrunner in a lot of ways is that for a TV show. But it's interesting for Disney Plus because they have had showrunners of sorts, but they usually have very little TV experience. But interestingly, these are some of the shows that have been the most successful for Disney on Disney Plus, including things like The Mandalorian, which of course the showrunner was Jon Favreau, who had directed a lot of TV but had never been a showrunner. You also have WandaVision and then Andor, right? So I think Disney, as the industry as a whole kind of figures out what to do with this thing called streaming, after diving headfirst into it without having a clear idea of what works best for the format, what's going to make the most money, how can we make money from this format, they're maybe starting to get a little wise in having a formal showrunner. And they couldn't have picked at least a more experienced, I don't want to say they couldn't have picked a better showrunner, but they couldn't have picked a more experienced showrunner than with Carlton Cuse, who, he's an American screenwriter, showrunner, producer, director. He's done a litany of different projects for TV, but he's probably best known for being the co-showrunner of a little show you may have heard of called Lost, right, with Damon Lindelof, and that's who's he's with above me, right? I admittedly have not watched Lost. My fiance Viviana is currently watching it on Netflix, so I kind of hear little bits and pieces or see little bits and pieces of it. It kind of infuriates me. But you know, I'm gonna try to reserve judgment, considering I have not actually watched it, A, all the way through, or B, actually all the episodes. Like, I'll just maybe watch 20 minutes of a random episode, and then like a week later, she's watching something a season later. But it was a very, very highly successful TV show, which ran from 2004 to 2010. And it's kind of weird because I feel like it's lost all cultural impact. So, you know, if you are below a certain age, you might not even... You probably have never watched Lost. You might not even really know much about it or you've even heard of it, right? And the thing about Lost that made it so successful, especially at the start, was that it was built on mystery box storytelling, right? So not a showrunner, but J.J. Abrams was one of the co-creators of the show. And his whole storytelling philosophy, not for every project he's ever done, but for many of them, and he even did like a TED Talk about it, and now in retrospect, the TED Talk kind of comes off a little hollow because we've seen his approach, which seemed really novel at the time. We've seen his approach like flame out and fall apart very easily. He basically talks about this idea that the mystery box, if you have a box and I tell you there's something really cool inside, but I don't tell you what it is, what do you want to do? You want to open the box, right? So basically he discussed, you know, if you design your stories that way, people will be really invested. And that's really useful for a TV show, which is all about getting people to come back week after week, right? The problem with that is that what that literally means for you as the writer is typically, because you can do it well, but typically what this means, especially for J.J. Abrams, and we know this to be true, what you do is propose an intriguing mystery. Or not even intriguing mystery, you present so many ridiculous things. And the audience goes, what is going on? I have to know what's going on. But as the writer, you don't actually know. You just kind of put all this stuff, you just threw all this stuff at the wall. And you've decided, like, we'll figure it out later. We'll figure out later what this means. Of course, he kind of applied that storytelling, ethos to the sequel trilogy, which of course really fell on its face when it came to that in terms of like setting up all these mysteries and really not having any interesting payoffs for them. And even just watching Lost tangentially or secondhand, Viviana's on season 4, and it just seems it eventually just became too self-concerned and self-important and kind of became very petty and soap opera-y. Right? Like, it stopped being about this core idea of these people being lost on this not only crash landing on an island, but on a mysterious island that has a lot of stuff, has a lot of secrets to uncover. It's really becoming now about, like, interpersonal politics, which is interesting, but it's clearly just because you've run out of ideas from the initial premise. And from my understanding, it had a very polarizing ending, right? Viviana writes in the comments, mystery box approach is not good all the time. J.J. Abrams' Star Wars was outrageous. Yeah, exactly. Again, like, there's a lot of high points in that trilogy, but that was, I think, universally, everyone agrees, did not work. Was this, like, the Force Awakens set up all of these mysteries that no one was worried about or thinking about. And then when they had no interesting payoffs for them, they were like, well, why do the fans have such high expectations? Because you created the expectation. I didn't know who Rey was to care who she really was, right? Like, I didn't know. You're the one who made it a mystery. I'm really going off the deep end here. So this is really unrelated to Carlton Cuse. Perhaps I just picked this story just so I could complain about Lost and J.J. Abrams. But this could be good, because here's the thing. I have major problems with Lost. And if he's one of the showrunners, that makes me concerned. And I haven't seen a lot of Damon Lindelof's stuff, but I really like his Watchmen miniseries on HBO. So, take that for what you will. I'm not going to say, okay, all the good stuff was Damon Lindelof. He did all the good stuff, and then Carlton Cuse did all the bad stuff. That's not what I'm saying. But perhaps this is still good for Star Wars, because while the overarching arc of Lost really kind of lost the plot both literally and figuratively, at least he comes from an era of television where he understands how you do episodic storytelling within the serialized framework. Because I think people think it's either one or the other. Either your show is essentially just a really long movie, or it's a bunch of standalone episodes that can kind of exist on their own. But something like Lost, to its credit, though maybe not to its credit because it was just kind of how shows were made back then, so it's not unique to Lost, that you have an arc. There's really 3 arcs. There's the series arc, there's a season arc, and then there's an arc within an episode. So that you at least feel like there is like a distinct, like, this is the raison d'etre for this episode. Rather than it just happens to be scenes 10 to 16 from this larger movie, right? So, you know, it perhaps Carlton Cuse can bring a old school television writing sensibility to make a Disney Plus show that actually feels like a goddamn TV show, right? I got some comments here. Jacob writes, the ending of Lost is bad because everyone guessed it seasons beforehand, but it kept going, acting like it was still a mystery. Yeah. That's another thing with the mystery box, is that you have to be careful, because if people guess your mystery, what your mystery is, you then either have 2 options. You either just go with the plan, and then people will be unsatisfied, or you do something so out of left field that doesn't really feel like it was earned, and people are unsatisfied. So it's very high risk and low reward. So I don't know why people do this, writers do this. Viviana writes, with Lost, they really use this tactic in storytelling and in the script, and it's so woven in such a strange way that something crazy happens and ends on a cliffhanger won't be addressed for another 3 or 4 episodes, if ever. That's such a great point, right? Like it is like this dangling this carrot that never even gets resolved, right? And Vivian also writes, I've essentially read the entire Wikipedia page and I'm still confused, like it's very convoluted. Yeah, because that's what happens when you build this. You have to create all these parameters and convoluted mechanisms. So all the, again, this video really just turned into like a Lost hating session, which I mean is fine. But all of this to say, this marks an interesting turn in the way Disney is making this content. A, having a showrunner, but also B, having a showrunner's experience as Carlton Cuse that, you know, maybe it can kind of bring a much needed sense of story structure to the streaming television landscape. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. We're done with Lost. If you're typing your Lost comments, delete them. We're done with it. Well, actually, you can post it, but I'm not going to read it. Well, I'll read it, but I'm not going to read it aloud. Okay, let's talk about story number 3. So the Washington Post, of course owned by Jeff Bezos, billionaire extraordinaire, or maybe not so extraordinaire, has struck a deal with OpenAI that will provide summaries, quotes, and links to its stories. It'll be available on ChatGPT. So I got a couple quotes here. First one from a joint press release saying, quote, this partnership reflects a shared commitment to making reliable, factual information easier to find and engage with, especially on complex or fast-moving topics where timely, well-sourced reporting like that of the Post matters most. ChatGPT will highlight the Post's journalism across politics, global affairs, business, technology, and more, always with clear attribution and direct links to full articles so people can explore topics in greater depth and context, end quote. Another quote here from Peter Elkins Williams, who's the head of global partnerships at the Washington Post, saying, quote, we're all in on meeting our audiences where they are. Ensuring ChatGPT users have our impactful reporting at their fingertips builds on our commitment to provide access where, how, and when our audiences want it, end quote. And one last quote here. I'm throwing all these quotes at you. Another quote from Varun Shetty, who's the head of media media partnerships at OpenAI, saying, quote, more than 500 million people use ChatGPT each week to get answers to all kinds of questions. By investing in high-quality journalism by partners like the Washington Post, we're helping ensure our users get timely, trustworthy information when they need it, end quote. So this is not an isolated thing. This is part of a larger trend of OpenAI partnering with media companies, of which there are many that they've struck these deals with, including, but certainly not limited to, News Corp, Hearst, Time, Condé Nast, and Vox Media. So they are really trying. The reason why they're doing this and they're striking these deals is OpenAI with ChatGPT. This is an attempt to legitimize their product by directly sourcing more up-to-date articles and information, right? So, because the big thing with AI is there's a big plagiarism component issue, right? Where if it's trained on, trillions of pieces of text, sometimes it's gonna rip from those texts word for word, right? When you ask it a question, right? And another issue is, I think this is getting better, but I remember when it first launched, the thing is that it was only up to date up to like September 2021 or something, right? So if you asked it about something that happened after that, it will be like, I don't know what you're talking about. That must have happened after the bounds of my knowledge, right? So having something like this, some kind of partnership, allows for, again, more real, perhaps not real time, but at least a little more up to date. And again, providing links and sources, right? So having that proper attribution shields OpenAI from those critiques of it's basically just a plagiarism machine, right? But this doesn't completely solve the problem, right? So currently, New York Times is suing OpenAI for using its content to train ChatGPT. The way New York Times sees it is that, this is our content, this is our copyrighted content, so if you want to use it to create a product, you need to pay us some kind of licensing fee. But what makes it hard, though, is that the way GPTs and generative AI work is that it consumes an inordinate amount of text and uses that to inform it's looking for patterns, right? It's not the same as I write an article and I don't provide the source for something, right? It's not as one-to-one. It really is like a human brain, where you're taking in all this information and then kind of filtering it and mixing it around, and it comes out through the prism of you, right? That's kind of how ChatGPT and models like it work. And then another issue that I think has really scared the media, the legacy media, is Google really disrupted legacy media, right? Because now you could search, and everyone wanted to be at the top of the search results. So that involves paid Google ads. That means optimizing your website with keywords like search engine optimization, so that without even having to pay for Google ads, your link or your article or your website will show up near the top of the basically playing the game, right? So what scares the shit out of these companies is that they basically have spent 20 years fine-tuning this method of basically gaming the system with SEO. Well, look, if we use these exact keywords, we'll be able to, rank highly, and we'll, this, that, and the other. But now what's happening, whenever you search on Google, Google automatically enters your query into its own AI model, Gemini. So, and it's sourcing links, but theoretically, AI could completely displace search, because it's so much more efficient in that you don't have to Frankenstein your question in a weird way so Google understands what you're trying to ask. With something like ChatGPT, it's very conversational. But because of that, you get your answer. If you want to do some more digging, or if you say, provide links so I can read more about it, otherwise it's going to give you an answer. So that really fucks up the business model of both Google as well as the companies, because they want you to click on the link so that they can then monetize your click, right? Whether it's behind a paywall, so you got to pay, or you see an ad on their website. So there's a lot of anxiety around AI when it comes to things like this, right? I won't get into the weeds on this, right? Because I've talked about AI in this channel. I think it's a tool. You're not going to lose your job to AI. You're going to lose your job to someone who knows how to, capitalize on AI. I use it for, mundane things like the title of my videos or the descriptions of my video, because those are not authentic artistic expressions. It's SEO driven. It's really just about gaming the system. So why waste my precious time that I could be using to be creative with trying to figure out what's the best keywords for my description so the algorithm will, right? Just fuck it. So this is why OpenAI is doing this. Why would Washington Post want to do this, right? Because again, theoretically they're threatened. So they might think, okay, like it's a lot of people might argue this is short-term benefit, but you're ultimately you're catalyzing the downfall of your industry. Because eventually the fear is eventually you won't need articles in journalism because ChatGPT will answer those questions for you, right? Which I think is actually a real concern, though I don't know how likely that is because it still needs to be sourcing stuff. So why would Washington Post want to do this? Well, I think it's an attempt to bolster its brand, right? Because obviously over the past year, but especially in like the last 6 months with the election, the Washington Post has gotten into a lot of hot water about, political issues that they've had in terms of Jeff Bezos kind of putting his thumb on the scale in terms of what the opinion and political leanings of the paper can be or should be. So I think it's gotten a lot of bad press. A lot of people have unsubscribed from Washington Post. So I think this is their attempt to get their content in front of more eyes, right? Though again, Washington Post is behind a paywall. I don't know if it is like you get the first 5 articles free or whatever, but how is this going to work? Because ChatGPT, a lot of people just use it for free. So if your ChatGPT searches are providing you links to Washington Post articles, and you click on the post and it's behind a paywall, are they hoping people will then sign up because they want to read this one random article from this ChatGPT prompt where they basically already got all the info they really wanted from ChatGPT? So I don't know how that's going to work. But ultimately, I think deals like this is the future. The future is hybrid, right? People will always search for information, right? And have always searched for information. So what changes is the modes in which we do that. Not to undermine or dismiss the concerns with things like AI and text models like ChatGPT specifically. But I would imagine you had a lot of, we don't have, it wasn't as vocal because the internet was still very nascent in a lot of ways. But I imagine with the dawn of Google, there's a lot of people being like, oh, but it undermines the value of research because, there's something about the experience of going to the library and having to take the time. And that's all true. But ultimately, most people don't give a shit about that, right? Like, that's the tension, is that nothing that I just said is wrong. It's just that does not outweigh the benefit for most people. And the same is going to be true for AI and ChatGPT and models like it. So, people will search for information, and traditional search, traditional media, and artificial intelligence, rather than being 3 potential ways to gain information or knowledge or understanding, they will all work in tandem to provide that information. At least that's my optimistic hope. But it still remains to be seen. Okay, just want to give another quick plug to another YouTube channel I have called Peter Squared, where I cover topics related to film, media, entertainment in a more structured video essay format. The video I have up right now is called A Closer Look at Frozen, where, you guessed it, I take a closer look at the Disney film Frozen, taking a look at what went right, what went wrong, and everything in between using these cartoon versions of myself. It was a lot of fun to make. Hopefully it's a lot of fun to watch. Go check it out, comment, let me know why you disagree with everything I said. You can find the link to that in the description down below. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay. Let's do my story number 4. This one's really funny. So Nathan Fielder has called out Paramount, the company, for removing an episode of Nathan For You from Paramount Plus. The reason for the removal, they cited quote-unquote sensitivities, concerns, concerning in episodes engagement with the topic of the Holocaust, which makes sense, right? And he called them out for this on his newer show, The Rehearsal. So let me do a little bit of background. So Nathan Fielder, Canadian, I don't even call him comedian, just a Canadian performance artist. I don't even know what you would call Nathan Fielder, but he had his show Nathan For You, which was on Comedy Central, which of course is owned by Paramount, and this was on from 2013 to 2017. Here's like the little Wikipedia description of the show. Quote, "The series centers on Nathan Fielder, a business school graduate and consultant whose aim is to help struggling businesses. His marketing proposals are often outlandish and elaborate," end quote. This is like one of my favorite shows ever made. It's like pseudo documentary, mockumentary, where like he is kind of doing a bit, but the people around him I don't think quite understand he's doing a bit. It's like performance art meets absurdist comedy. Like it's really just ingenious. Like it's almost hard to classify. It's almost hard to classify what the show even is. So if you've never watched it, just go watch a couple episodes. So they're really short. They're only like 20 minutes each, and each episode actually really has like 2 episodes in it. And that actually leads me to talking about the episode in question here. So this is relating to the horseback riding / man zone episode. Because again, there's like 2 halves to each episode. I see a comment here from Jacob. "This episode is legendary. It is one of the best bits in the entire show." Jacob, are you putting the comment? Are you talking about the Nathan For You episode or this episode of The Rehearsal that just came out recently? Let me know in the comment. But regarding this episode, from Nathan For You at least, this was the second episode of the 3rd season, where Nathan creates, and like I'm laughing just thinking about it. Like this is making me want to go re-binge it. Like I literally binged it all in 1 week. I watched there's 4 seasons. I watched season 1 on Monday night, and season 2 on Tuesday, and did Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And Jacob says the Nathan For You episode. Yeah. This is definitely, like, I don't remember all these episodes, but then when I read it, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that one, right? So Nathan creates an outerwear brand of clothing called Summit Ice. And this is a real brand you can buy from. Right? This is not a fictional show. And the reason why he creates this brand is that it's in response to Taiga, which is like a German clothing brand, which had published a tribute to a guy who was also coincidentally a Holocaust denier. Nathan Fielder is Jewish, right? So he created Summit Ice, and the brand would center Holocaust remembrance as part of its brand to like counteract Taiga, or is it Taiga, right? So what he does in the episode, he convinces a sporting goods store owner to let him build a display of information about, it's like not funny, but it's really funny, about build a display of information about Hitler's atrocities and the Holocaust next to the jackets in this store. And like I said, the brand still exists. It's a real brand that donates all of its proceeds to like Holocaust remembrance organizations, right? So that's Nathan For You. Nathan Fielder now has a new show called The Rehearsal, which I admittedly have not watched any of. This is on HBO. It aired its first season in 2022. It's just starting up its second season now. And here's the Wikipedia description for the show. It's a little bit lengthier, but I figured I'd read just to give you a sense of what this show is like. Quote, "The Rehearsal features Nathan Fielder as a fictionalized version of himself, helping ordinary people rehearse upcoming difficult conversations or life events through the use of sets and actors hired to recreate real situations. The situations can be trivial, like confessing to a lie about educational history, or more complex, like raising a child. Fielder commissions extravagant sets with every detail recreated and hires actors to inhabit these sets and practice different dialogue trees with his clients dozens of times to try to prepare them for every variable. Information used to train the actors and build the sets is often collected without the subject's knowledge. This aspect, however, is often played with a comedic effect," end quote. So also very well acclaimed show. Again, kind of this weird intersection of comedy and performance art and absurdism, right? So this leads us to the Nathan For You episode that was removed, right? This episode involving Summit Ice and talking about the Holocaust was removed from Paramount Plus. This decision is traced back to a decision made by Paramount Plus's German division. And this is a quote from Nathan Fielder. I think this was a quote from the rehearsal, like in this most recent episode, saying, quote, "In late 2023, a decision was made by Paramount Plus Germany to remove the episode in their region after they became uncomfortable with what they called, quote, anything that touches on anti-Semitism in the aftermath of the Israel-Hamas attacks. This act by Germany triggered the attention of other European Paramount branches, and they in turn pulled the episode too. Before long, the ideology of Paramount Plus Germany had spread to the entire globe, eliminating all Jewish content that made them uncomfortable," end quote. So, what Nathan Fielder is saying is, it's not even that they found it anti-Semitic. They just didn't want to touch. They just didn't want to touch on anything that even related to or reference anti-Semitism. And again, this eventually rippled throughout all of Paramount, so it's now unavailable in all territories. If you go to Paramount Plus and try to watch this episode, it's not there. However, it's still available on Max. And you want to know where it is still available? On DVD or Blu-ray, whatever it is, the physical media. They can never remove stuff for copyright lapses or anything like this, right? So in response to all this, Nathan Fielder, he made the situation a key part of an episode of the rehearsals season 2. Fielder commenting, saying, quote, I think he said this in this episode, saying, quote, "Currently on the Paramount app, there are 50 results for Nazis, 10 for Hitler, and 0 for Judaism. We've been erased." And of course, like I said, Fielder is Jewish. So what he did was he hired, so instead of helping another client rehearse a difficult situation, he hired actors to help him prepare for his meeting with Paramount about this. But for the rehearsal, he depicts Paramount as Nazi Germany. And as you see this picture above me, they made like a little infographic of like the way they, in a lot of World War II documentaries, like Nazism spreads. It's like Paramount spreads. And they have, they have soldiers wearing, like, instead of swastika bands, they're Paramount logo bands. And the room that they're doing the rehearsal, it has like these giant Paramount logo flags that are like in the same vein of Nazi flags, but they're blue, of course. So Nathan Fielder says in the episode, quote, "I didn't know what the Paramount Plus Germany offices looked like, so I sort of had to take a guess," end quote. This is hilarious, and I've been wanting to watch the rehearsal, but maybe this is what will get me to watch at least the first season, and then kind of catch up with season 2. And this is really risky for his career, and he even mentions this. I don't think he's the creator of this, but he was in another show on Showtime, which is owned by Paramount, called The Curse with Emma Stone, which I think premiered like 2 years ago, maybe. And that has yet to be renewed for a second season. So he's really being dicey, but it really speaks to Hollywood's cautiousness. Again, like reading more into the story, like the fact that they weren't even claiming that the episode was anti-Semitic, but like they just didn't want to have a video that even talked about anti-Semitism, really just shows how like business-oriented and feckless media executives are. And it's in such contrast to Nathan Fielder, who is known for his he's a provocateur, right? If you watch any of these episodes, sometimes he gets himself in situations where like he might get hurt, like get like punched by someone. So he's really, like I gotta give the guy credit, and if nevertheless is giving us this amazing graphic above me, that he really is just a one of a kind. And it'll be interesting to see how this whole situation gets resolved. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay, before we're going, I see Viviana. Sorry, I missed your comment when we were talking about ChatGPT. I love chat heart emoji. Yeah, I'm a apologist for ChatGPT, but I'm gonna blast Viviana right now. She calls it chat like it's a person and be like, "Oh well, I was talking to chat today." Vivian, that's unhealthy. It's not a person. You gotta. And not only are you doing that, but then you're publicly commenting, "I love chat" with a capital C, like it's a name. That's preposterous. Okay. Anyway, sorry. Let's talk about story number 5. So Dominic Sessa has been cast as Anthony Bourdain in an upcoming biopic from A24 on the legendary chef, titled simply Tony. It's going to be directed by Matt Johnson, who directed Blackberry, which was a film I really, really enjoyed. The film is going to take place in 1976 when a young Bourdain was working and living in Provincetown, Massachusetts, which I believe is on the Cape, right? Isn't Provincetown Cape Cod? Provincetown, Massachusetts. Yeah, that's on Cape Cod. And so a little bit about Anthony Bourdain, right? So very, very iconic chef. He enrolled in culinary school in 1978. So a few years after, this movie is set to take place. He gained notoriety for his 2000 memoir, quote, Kitchen Confidential, Adventures in the Culinary Underbelly. But he's really best known, at least with my generation, best known for his travel food shows, right? The first being Anthony Bourdain, No Reservations, from 2005 to 2012. And then immediately following that, Anthony Bourdain, Parts Unknown, from 2013 to 2018. But unfortunately, that show, came to an end because unfortunately Bourdain committed suicide in 2018. And he was only like 61. I say only 61, That's something we don't think about. We usually, it's very epidemic with younger people, but suicide is an epidemic that affects people of all ages, right? So I remember that being a really tragic news, right? So it's going to be interesting to see, and we're going to talk about this a little bit in like just a few minutes about the sensitivity surrounding this and really should they be making this. But just looking at this casting, Dominic Sessa, he's really hasn't been in much, right? He's the young actor who debuted in The Holdovers with Paul Giamatti, the Alexander Payne movie. And he was actually discovered because he attended the school where the film was shot. So they let the kids in the drama program like audition. And that's how he got discovered. And now he's going to be playing Anthony Bourdain in an A24 movie, right? He's such a strong young talent. I say as if I'm much older, but he's like 22 or 23. I'm pushing 30, right? I'm 28. So he's young to me. And he, biopics should try to cast people that capture the essence or spirit of the person rather than the exact physical look. But that being said, I will say there is a strong resemblance, right? They don't look exactly the same, but they have the curly hair. They're both tall and lanky, right? I think this is pretty good casting, right? And he's a great actor. So, I think the quality of the film, and I like Matt Johnson, who directed Blackberry, who's directing this, right? But I guess the question is, will this be good, right? Because biopics tend to be middle of the road, mediocre. But I think the most concerning thing is the fact that we're dealing with Anthony Bourdain, right? A lot has been written about after his death, so much content, authorized and unauthorized, whether it be documentaries or books, were just pumped out because there was so much money to be made. Because people loved Anthony Bourdain before. And then with his death, the people saw there's like I said, there's money to be made. And not that you can't do that because art is the way we process things. But even the better ones of these, they seemed a little cynical, right? And someone who's not happy about this biopic, Trey Dean, I'm sorry, the writer from GQ put out an article, quote, "The Anthony Bourdain biopic is a bad idea," end quote. And it's a fairly lengthy article. I wouldn't even call it an article, a treatise, right? But I'd like to just pull this one quote here, this little paragraph that I think really captures why maybe this biopic shouldn't even be made in the first place. Dean says, quote, "Bourdain would hate this. Anyone who's watched 5 minutes of him on screen or read even a couple paragraphs of his writing could tell you Bourdain had both an ornate understanding of what it meant to be cool and a menacing streak of self-deprecation. An origin story biopic from a trendy production house with multiple successful Oscar campaigns in the last decade, wildly uncool, wildly self-indulgent, wildly out of touch with the ethos he spent his entire career establishing. I try not to speak for the dead or for people I don't know, but something tells me the dude would rather work a brunch shift," end quote. So you see where Trey Dean stands. Again, that's really interesting that, how many movies do we make about real people that probably wouldn't have wanted a movie to be made, but, people in their state sign off on it because that means money for them, right? Whereas certain estates are way more protective, and that's why we haven't seen biopics of certain people, but just because the estate has been really protective about how the person in question is represented. and the talent involved, right? So, I think this has the makings to be a good movie, but I guess the question is not, will it be good? The question is maybe should it be made, right? And I'm in the middle about it. I don't know. I think there's a really compelling argument for both ends, but whether or not this is just a cynical cash grab or a really, sincere and delicate portrait of a man that we all knew and loved, it remains to be seen, which it is. Okay, just want to give one last plug before the show wraps up. I want to plug Cinema Q. So it's not just a YouTube channel. It started as and still is a Substack newsletter where we publish written reviews for new movies coming out, primarily right now by my good friend and friend of Cinema Q, so Jacob Boblet, who's kind of taken the reins over for me, especially while I'm kind of in a transitional moment. I'm gonna try to be getting back to doing reviews around the end of the summer. But he's been putting out some really great stuff, so highly recommend you go check that out. You can find the link to that in the description down below. You can also just find us by going to your browser, typing in cinemaandqso.substack.com. Once again, thank you all so much for watching. If you haven't already, please like this video. It really, really helps with engagement and the algorithm and people, finding the channel. So if you haven't found the channel, why not subscribe? The algorithm's been really dicey with me lately. I feel like the channel has really had some plummeting stats over the last week or two, so it would really, really make me feel good about all the work I put into this. If I just get just one more subscriber, just one more, and then one more after that, and then eventually we'll get to 1 million. But until then, until next time, peace out.